Sorry folks for that delay. I think we're back online with the YouTube. So I'm going to just start. I'm going to start down the list and let everyone have their comments. I would just ask if you could try to keep them to 3 to 5 minutes so that we can get everybody. And at the end, if somebody else has something else to add, they could raise their hand, and then we'll take those comments too. Does that sound fair? All right. So again, I'm just going to go down the list and unmute. Alan Clarkson, if you can unmute yourself.
I am unmuted.
Okay, Alan, go ahead.
All right, I wasn't expecting this to be able to speak at all. I wonder if you're going to have anything like a civilian complaint review board with community members on it that would be identified, and if someone had a problem, they could go to a particular member of this board. You may not want to call it that. It doesn't really make any difference. But if someone felt uncomfortable going to an official board or review panel, they could approach one of the others, perhaps someone who looked like them or they knew who they were. Is that in the plan?
Well, it's not. You have the plan. It's not in the plan at the moment. You know, the position we had at the panel when we discussed it, or at least my position, was that you have an elected board, and those are the people that you should be bringing concerns to. Now, we've made it easier by putting the complaint forms on the website for anybody to get. They don't have to go to the police department, which we did understand could be intimidating to some. We are going to designate our liaison to the police department, who's an elected member of this board, as a recipient of any complaint, okay? And that board member, the intent would be for that board member to then initiate whatever the investigation is, and that information will be public. So rather than to put a unelected board in between, we're going to make the process easier, we believe, for our residents. And that's it. That's the intent at the moment. We're listening to your comments tonight. So I didn't want this sort of to be a debate. I wanted to hear everyone's comments so we can get them, digest them, and see what modifications, if any, we need to make to the plan.
I hope you see the difference in what I was talking about and what you're providing. What you're providing has the exact ambition of people who might need to come forward, whereas what I was talking about would not. So that's all I can say.
Okay, Alan, thank you. And again, all of this is being recorded, so we have all of your comments, and we'll take those into consideration. Annette Henderson, could you unmute? Annette, we're getting some Annette, we're getting feedback from you. I don't know whether you have.
Do you want me to?
You may have multiple, either a computer and a phone on, maybe.
Tell her to turn her speakers down.
Just turn your speakers down and then make your comments. All right, while Annette's trying to do that, I'm going to go to Ash Stanley and ask you to unmute. Ash, are you there? Would you like to make a comment? Okay, then I have a Barlett. Barlett, are you listening? Okay, let's go to Beth Mendez. Okay, thank you, Beth. That was a good suggestion. If you want to, if you have something particular you want to say or pass, you could do it into the chat. Beverly Braxton. Beverly, do you want to say anything? All right, well, we'll just keep going, see what happens. I have a Bob. Is there a Bob? Are you listening? How about Brian Gitt? Brian, are you there?
Yeah, I am. I have nothing to say at this time, but in the future I will. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I have Brian Mock. Brian, any comments? Veronica, we will get to you, okay? Carmela Barrazas, want to unmute? All right, Jeff Howard, it says Carol, but I know it's you, Jeff, so. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I wasn't expecting this, like Alan wasn't, but I have this thought. You were under pressure to come up with a plan that met state requirements so you could continue to get the funding that you needed, and I think everybody understands that. My question is, in your mind and in the mind of the board, is that the end of the story? Or is there something that can be done, that should be done, beyond this?
Well, I think it's Jeff, I think it's an ongoing process in terms of measuring improvements, where they can be made, and performance, and then, I just don't see it ending.
Well, that's good that you don't see it ending, because I do think there are more steps in the process that could be taken. And the thing that Warwick, I think, now realizes is that there are some issues that maybe have been under the surface for some of us, and now are not so under the surface. And they need to be openly addressed, not with the point of view of saying who screwed up, but with the point of view of saying we can be a better community. And I believe that pretty strongly, as you know, Michael. And I'm sure there are many people listening who would also be willing to be part of that process. So that's all I'm saying. I hope this is not the report that you guys have come up with, which gets a check mark for meeting the state requirements. I hope it's not seen as that's it, end of the deal.
Thank you, Jeff. Charlene Hirschberg, can you unmute if you'd like to make a comment?
Well, thank you for calling on me. I am very concerned how watered down the E203 became. And I think that's something most of us here tonight, I recognize a lot of the people here have talked about it. Most of us here are wondering why it was so watered down and what the town of Warwick is going to do to correct that.
Okay,
Just
well,
saying that, taking out a reference to Black Lives Matter does not mean that all lives don't matter. They do matter, and we need that in there to satisfy those of our citizens who feel unheard and unrespected.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Yep. I have a Deb Sue. You have a comment? Then I'm going to move on to Dennis Van Dunk. Can you unmute yourself, Dennis?
No comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Elizabeth Knight, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. No comment at this time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I have Ellen Van Dunk. Would you want to unmute, make a comment?
Thank you. No comment just yet.
All right, thank you very much. Carly and George Foster.
Hello. I was trying to find within the draft report has a reference to an appendix that is supposed to identify ways in which community outreach would be increased beyond current efforts, and I have been unable to find that. If you might point us to that. And then I think a follow-up question is if this may be addressed by that appendix, but if the plan could be more specific about its the department's intentions to engage more deeply with the community and integrate community feedback.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the appendix is on the website. It may not have all of that information, but when the report is finalized, based on the inputs we've received, there may be additional information added to it. Glenn Stevens, do you have a comment?
Not at this time, thank you.
All right, thank you, Glenn. All right, Irene Chacker.
That's it.
Not at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, I have a Gene C. Like to make a comment?
No comment at this time.
Thank you, Gene. Jennifer O'Connor, would you like to make any comments? Okay, then we will go to Joan Terrell.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to make a comment, please. I'd like to read my comment so I, don't mess up and I get it out.
That's good.
And I want to thank you for the opportunity to make a comment. And I want to say I'm a proud Warwickian and I support our community and law enforcement as well. But my comment reads that I believe the 12-point proposal for reform that's before us tonight is sadly inadequate to our mandate. I think for the most part, the report is a restating of policies and practices currently in place that still don't completely serve the needs and the concerns of our communities of color and therefore aren't adequate for our community in general. where the plan offers some new initiatives, such as hiring a Spanish language translator, requiring the provision of a business card to anyone interacting with an officer. These initiatives are nowhere near sufficient to constitute a comprehensive, systemic examination of reform that this community deserves. The state guidelines released in August 2020 were a detailed 139-page roadmap for engaging law enforcement and the public in a collaborative conversation, which emphasized the centrality of involving communities of color. Seeing policing through the experiences of people of color is essential to the mission of police reform and to building essential trust, because there is a widely documented historic unwillingness among those who hold the reins of power in our civic organizations to admit to or even recognize the existence of systemic racism. Without this understanding, there can be no reform. Now, unfortunately, the early public indicators of the process here in Warwick were, I believe, cause for concern. There was scant notice of public meetings, of which only 2 were held. The first meeting was afflicted with audio problems and was dominated by a presentation on policing in Warwick that absorbed most of the meeting time, but contributed nothing to the advancement of a discussion of anti-racism. The presentation concluded with a declaration that there was no racism problem in Warwick policing, as evidenced by a record of no complaints in the last 2 years. This categorical statement of denial, in spite of what our BIPOC community members have told us of their encounters and their concerns, is far more a red flag for the presence of some structural bias than it is a denial of it. The second meeting was marked by comments on whether or not law enforcement itself is not the more misunderstood and, quote, abused group than people of color. Further, it was noted that a town like Warwick doesn't operate at the scale, nor encounter the racial tensions that confront an urban police department, such as in New York City. These comments are exactly the sort of thinking that perpetuates a culture of denial among law enforcement and community members and crushes any hope of trust building with our BIPOC residents. It perpetuates a lie that bias in policing primarily exists in urban locations and not in picturesque small towns. Systemic racism isn't about scale or numbers. It's about organization and cultures, large and small. We just encountered this same misguided thinking in an ad in this week's Advertiser condemning cultural and racial diversity education in our schools, with the argument, basically, we don't have this or need this here in our wonderful town of Warwick. These problems exist in the inner city only. Our BIPOC families know this is a lie, and we believe them when they tell us so. The intent of the E-203 process was not to revisit the question of the existence of systemic racism in policing in New York State. The mandate was written with the understanding that biased cultures, practices, attitudes, and policies do exist to one degree or another, and that we must reform these systems for everybody's benefit. Sadly, to this date, I feel we've squandered this important opportunity to do full justice to the task. We're once again letting down, I think, our BIPOC neighbors, who deserve a far stronger voice in these deliberations and a far stronger response. Why, for instance, was this process not begun last summer with a questionnaire distributed to the entire community to provide feedback on our experiences and concerns with policing in our community? I feel that would have been a helpful point of departure. Why weren't far more voices of color representing diverse demographics invited to serve on the EO-203 panel, instead of stacking the panel with people who were not of color and even political allies? It's not surprising that the work product from this process is lacking in depth, seriousness, and policy specificity that the subject of this work merits. Where do we go from here with the proposal, time being so short and with much work to do? My thoughts on that are the following. I think, where are the plans for body cams 24/7? How about creating, and this gets back to the issue earlier of a civilian complaint review board, the trust being the issue, I think we should formulate a board that does not have a presence of police on it, one that is made up of trusted individuals in the community who are trained and responsible to conduct interviews, to take in complaints, to possibly mediate, to approach law enforcement with these communications, but one that can give discretion and anonymity, to, especially to people of color who want to make complaints. How about brainstorming with our police union and the county and civil service to see where diversity recruitment, test preparation, and hiring practices might be altered or expanded in order to bring more diversity to the hiring force? How about tracking and making public the details of every traffic stop, including tracking the numbers of stops of people of color and the reasons for those stops? There were over 3,000 traffic stops, according to the police statistics on the website in Warwick alone last year. The public should have access to the details of these pretextual stops, since racial profiling is often related to this practice. And we should work to minimize these encounters for the safety not only of the public, but of our hardworking police officers as well. I agree we should distribute an annual public survey. I propose that we include among respondents people under the age of 18, those who've been arrested, anyone who's had encounters with the police, and we should make specific efforts to again reach out and encourage responses from communities of color and our immigrant communities. The police department should also obviously supply raw data when they're reporting out to us. I think we should look at internal affairs investigations and see if they should be removed from the precinct level, if not already. I think bias and anti-racism work should be ongoing, and it is mentioned in the proposal, but it should not be a simple annual 4-hour box checking exercise. It should be integral to the workings, the daily workings of law enforcement. I think we should end the use of school resource officers, which militarize our schools, disproportionately target immigrant and BIPOC children. They alienate students from school culture. They criminalize student behavior that's better addressed by school leadership and not by law enforcement. I think evidence has shown, and this is empirical evidence, that SROs do not suppress crime, but they do introduce children to the criminal justice system at a younger age. And this disadvantages definitely children of color in the main. How about diverting those resources to crime prevention initiatives like increased counseling, pre-arrest diversion programs, or mediation programs? Where is the plan to incorporate mental health and social work professionals as law enforcement team members for police calls that don't require armed officers? And finally, in an environment where we must build trust across communities, how do we formulate fair policy, respectful policy that can identify and intervene with officers who may exhibit violent extremist political views or articulate racial or other particular animus or bias that may impact their capacity to discharge their duties fairly and safely? And to close, I would say writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's written wonderful meditations on race in America, could have been writing this sentence I'll close with to us here in the Warwick community on this proposal tonight. And he wrote, quote, "An America that asks what it owes its most vulnerable citizens is improved and humane. An America that looks away is ignoring not just the sins of the past, but the sins of the present and the certain sins of the future," unquote. I really hope we can expand and make permanent and do better than we're doing on this at the moment. And I thank you for allowing me to make this comment.
Thanks for your comments, John. Appreciate it. I left off with John Whitaker, who I think is Pat McMillan, if that's correct. Pat, do you want to make a comment? Okay, then I'm just going to keep moving here. Katie Bizzaro, do you want to say anything, or are you here as a reporter?
I'm here as a reporter, thank you.
All right, thanks. Kathy Brigger, you want to unmute?
Hello, I actually had provided my additional comments. For those of you who don't know, I represent the Warwick Area Migrant Committee, and many of the people that I represent, we've had several meetings with my board of directors, and my board of directors is made up of over 60% of farm workers And we had, also we've done outreach into the camps, to talk to people in the Warwick and Pine Island area about what they felt. So my comments were, I think, Michael, those are included in the public now?
They are.
Is that?
That's
good?
correct.
So just in general, for people who are interested, one of the top requests that people had asked for was they are living outside of the village of Warwick, and so many of them are looking for an ID card, because when they go to pick up kids at school, or if there's an accident, they're unable to be able to access, the ID. They also are finding that they have asked for that, but also this idea that, Michael, when we first started, I think you had said, and I think it's been brought up a few times, that we could continue this process with having people, speak forward and speak and talk in a regular session, not as a board, but as a council, because a lot of communities have that set up, and I think that really is helpful. Specifically, I know we were asked in the EO, the process is to also review some of the specific policies and procedures, and I just added, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I also looked at ongoing community engagement. Having this type of council would be helpful, because like, all people could be participating in a less formal way, but in a way that would allow us to look at data that comes from some of the police stops and other things. I think also looking at mental health data, because I know people from our community have suffered greatly. They have had a very high rate of COVID and other issues. Also working with community groups, informal meetings, continuing with community groups. I think with police officers does help. We've had some connections already, and I think it would help to continue that. Also, recruitment of a diverse police force. One of the things that I think we heard from the police force that they have to select people from the list. So I would encourage all of us on this call who work with people of color to actually help people see how they can take tests, how they can prepare for tests, and how they can even know that this is a possibility. Last night we had some Goshen police officer come in to speak to about 7 of our kids who were interested in police as an occupation, and I think it went really well. But those are the kind of opportunities that we really need to all foster, to really put some effort into this, because a lot of people of color may never see themselves in a job like this. And I think we as a community step up and say, let's give these people an opportunity. That's how it's going to happen. And then my last, it's in the public record, but I also reviewed policy for use of force and other things, and I made some specific recommendations that, not as a police person, but as some of my colleagues from ACLU have worked with other towns in Newburgh and Goshen and other things. They've been able to help kind of look at this and say what are the things that are needed. So those are very specific recommendations that I have made in my document.
Okay, Kathy, thank you. And Kathy did serve on the panel. Ken Gallagher, do you want to say anything? Unmute yourself.
Michael, I'm just observing at this point in time. I may want to make comments at the end if that's possible.
Sure.
Or near the end.
Yeah, we're going to try to make sure everybody gets an opportunity. Thank you,
Okay.
Ken.
Thank you.
Kristen Dwyer.
Yes, hello. I would like to thank you for acknowledging that Black Lives Matter in the report. I think there are some good items within the report, such as engaging a Spanish language interpreter. I also understand that some reforms go beyond the town level, but I would like to see the town engage in making those reforms happen rather than passing the buck and saying this is out of our hands. You have put in the report that you want to advocate for resources to the Orange County Mental Health Department. So again, that is an example of advocating for something that isn't directly within the town's control. I think the hiring process could similarly use engagement to be able to figure out how to change what's happening currently with the civil service system in order to encourage more diversity in those applicants and in who ends up in that hiring pool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Liam Gregan, do you want to comment? You can unmute.
It's actually Nicole Cregan, but no particular comment at this time, but I would like to say I do agree and echo everything that Joan so eloquently put forward. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Lisa Fuentes, would you unmute?
Yes, hi. My name is Luisa Fuentes. I'm a resident of Warwick and a former prosecutor for this county. I have a few things to say. As a Black woman, I am not only upset, but I am disturbed at the way this situation was handled, with the fact that there were not enough people of color on this committee whose voices needed to be heard. And what I mean by that is people who are not head of organizations or part of church groups, people who have day-to-day negative interactions with police, people who have had negative interactions throughout the village of Warwick and the town of Warwick as well. And one of the things that I would strongly recommend this committee look to do, or Warwick in general, as Ms. Tyrell had stated, is to send out a survey focusing on people of color and their feelings, not just on the police of Warwick, but policing in general. Because one of the things that has not been addressed is the fact that policing as an institution is based on racism and the former need to collect slaves and bring them back to their owners, enslaved people. Almost every Black person I know, and I know quite a few of them, have a history of some place in their family where some member has had negative interaction with the police, whether it be down south or up here. And those stories become pervasive within our family structures, but within our own DNA. And the fact that there has not been any attempt to educate police departments on why people of color feel the way they do about policing as an institution seems to really be a missed opportunity, but also a failure. Additionally, Executive Order 203 required that before any kinds of changes were made, there was an examination of evidence-based research and policies and procedures that have been utilized throughout the country in terms of how policing could be changed, how policing has affected communities of color, etc. And from what I see, not one moment in this situation has been devoted to doing research. It came out not too long ago that a Chicago-based research plan found that police officers used more force against Black people and other people of color than they used against white people. So even if the words of the use of force policy are changed, if the attitudes, minds, and perceptions of those engaging in the use of force are not challenged and addressed, then it doesn't matter what's written on paper, because the actual action will still be biased and racist. So one of the things that needs to happen here is there really needs to be an education of the police on understanding how policing has been used and abused, against people of color, especially in the Black communities. And I'm seeing faces here, and I don't mean to be rude, but there are enough of you on this call who have seen with your own eyes police utilizing fire hoses, sticks, and dogs against Black people who only tried to be recognized as human beings in this country, and it wasn't that long ago. So we should not try to make it seem as if this is an ancient history lesson. This is recent history that many of you on this call were alive for and witnessed. Additionally, it is unconscionable that this process did not send out a survey to the community to ask what Black people and people of color feel about policing, and specifically about not just this police department, but I can tell you specific police officers who are known to certain groups as being harsher, more aggressive, more violent, and I'll say it, racist to people of color and Black people in and throughout our community. So I would encourage this committee, this group, and especially you, Mr. Sweeten, who has taken on the role of being the voice of this committee, despite the fact that there should be no one voice, to hear the voice of those of us who were not allowed to speak, who were not asked to participate, and who have not been given the opportunity to fully express ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mary McCoskey, you wanted to say something? Make a comment?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I had a number of questions. I did look through the report and even the trainings, and I have several questions. One, who will conduct the implicit bias training? And will it be interactive or merely lectures? Will there be follow-up to this within the department? Because sitting through a lecture or PowerPoint session is not effective. It has to be interactive, and it has to be discussed, and it has to be supported. Second of all, how will complaints from the public be handled? And I think that's already been answered, but frankly, is it possible? I'm not sure that is going to work very well. Can mediation be used, for example? And another question I have is, well, it's really a concern. I'm especially concerned about how calls involving those with mental illness are handled. And that takes a special kind of understanding and a special kind of behavior. So I think there has to be special training for that. And I would like to see people who deal with mental illness be on those calls. I would like to see them even take the first response. And then if the police are back up, that's fine. Because the way someone who's going through a mental illness crisis perceives a police officer is as a complete threat, even if the police officer is not being a threat. So I just think you should be aware of that. I would also welcome workshops on police-civilian interaction, which was in the plan, but I would like to know what the format would be. Just having the police tell the public what they should do will not be the proper way to do it. This must be a dialogue. It's what the police would expect of people and what people would expect of the police, and that's a dialogue. I also wanted to know, there was a mention of an annual community survey. Who will create this annual community survey? Will community members be involved with it? Will its results be made public or result in a public meeting? And at a previous meeting, Supervisor Sweeten, you had said that you would welcome a community discussion about race, and I did receive a response from you, and you said you would like to do that with one or more meetings, and I think that's very important. I think that's very important to continue this dialogue. I have another question. I would wonder why the police policy has nothing in it that states that no member of the police force may be a member of an extremist group. Across the country, we have found that there have been former police officers and current police officers who are members of extremist groups who were involved in the insurrection on January 6th. We have to make sure that none of our members of our police department would be involved with an extremist group, and I think that should be part of the policy. And let's see if I had anything else. I think that's probably all I had at this point, although I think that the yearly trainings, implicit bias 4 hours, de-escalation 4 hours, community relations 4 hours, crisis intervention 4 hours, those are major points of training. I'm not sure that's enough. It does say minimum, but I hope those would involve more than that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mary. Matt's Spice Handler, do you want to unmute and make a comment?
No, I have no comment at this time, but I would like to say that I echo a lot of the sentiments that have been presented here tonight. So,
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. M. Coyle, do you have a comment?
Yes, hi, I'm Megan Coyle. I'm a resident of Warwick. I'm just going to read this. When increasing training, why only 4 hours yearly is the minimum? I do not feel that is an adequate minimum, especially when it comes to de-escalation training. Besides just training from the mental health department, can we also work towards getting a team of mental health specialists, social workers who respond to situations regarding a mental health crisis? Other cities have been very successful with this. And also, if civil service law is responsible for the lack of diversity in candidates in the hiring process for our police force, would you work with us in asking for change from CSL? Many people demand better recruitment from civil service law, and would you be willing to help us demand that? Thank you.
We're all open to civil service being reformed. That we've said that in the panel. It's just it's a process that needs to be changed on a state level, and we're happy to advocate for that, for sure. Thank you for your comment. Melanie Carter-Piasek, I'm sorry. I have a Michael that doesn't have a last name. Michael, if you want to comment. I'm going to go then to Michael Gurvich. Do you want to unmute?
Oh, no, thank you. Thanks for calling me, but I have no comments at this time.
Okay, let me get back down to my place. I'm sorry. Trying to let people in here. Nicole, I have a Nicole with no last name. Nicole, do you want to comment?
No, I have no comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Paul Osel, you have a comment, Paul?
Not so much a comment, but I want to make sure that there are a couple people in the chat who said, well, Roz Gitt would like to comment. She's the last one. But before that, someone named, let me see here, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Back to Carmela Barrazas says she can't unmute herself, but she was wondering, she's asking how to become a volunteer translator. Her first language is Spanish and second is Portuguese. Thank you, she says.
Sure, she can contact my office. Just give me a call. I know Carmela, and we're happy to have assistance. You know, some of the issues are driven by, obviously, by budgets, and everyone here on the call is a taxpayer. We get it. So we're trying our best with the resources that we have, and we'll seek others. So I just want everybody to know that. But any volunteer help is welcome, and Carmela certainly, we look forward to that. Richard Slater, do you have a comment?
Yes, and I joined the meeting a little bit late, but I guess one comment, and I put it in the chat, was just, we talk a lot about recruitment and how we need to get more people of color to apply, but I guess I'm probably not educated enough to understand what's holding back the town or the police department from recruiting or finding folks, people of color who could be candidates. Obviously, there are a lot of police candidates that I can imagine there's ways that we can recruit them. This is, in my own company, something that we use quite aggressively through recruitment firms, and specifically that will target or work with people of color in the communities. I'm just a little bit baffled why we don't have that ability. And if it is limited, is there not some ways that we could learn from other towns that have done this successfully? So just, that's a comment and a question out to the town of
Sure,
Warwick.
yeah, one of our goals is to try to obviously reach out in different ways. We have already, we've tried. But it is a civil service process, so there's a physical agility test that has to be passed first, then there's a written test, and there's a list compiled that the county then has, and you have to select off that list from the top 3, working your way down the list. And then the test is good until the list gets small enough that the county runs another test. So it's a system that, maybe is stacked against, the person that decides one day they want to do this, and then, it's 2 years or a year till another test. So, that's a lobbying effort with the state and the county, state civil service really. But we're happy to do that, and we're also happy we've talked to some of the panel members about how to reach out to encourage younger people early on to get into the process. So, yeah, we're happy to try to do that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's, certain agencies or groups that we could work with, or I'm coming out of a corporate perspective, but I would imagine that there are towns that have done this well, and there has to be a model out there that maybe we could replicate and not reinvent the wheel. But I think it's just a little one-sided to be asking people of color to come and find us when clearly we have people of color in our community, and there should be ways to outreach and develop that. And that's something that I think the town, as part of this plan, should really look at, because to say I don't have a pipeline of people of color, then the next question is, then how do we address that? Because we have people of color in our community, and what's the outreach? How do we encourage them to start this process? And especially if there's feelings, as Louisa so eloquently stated, that there is a history here and an impression of is not going to change anything. It's the definition of insanity, trying the same thing and expecting different results.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the comment. Roz Gitt, I'm sorry, Roz, it's a small screen.
Hi, I just want briefly to say that I appreciate and support all the comments that we've heard so far. And what I really appreciate is the richness of perspective that we're finally getting a chance to share. And other than what everyone said, my biggest regret about this process and this meeting is that we're not having a conversation. This isn't a dialogue. This is just people stating, and there's no chance to respond, respectfully respond, which I think we're all capable of. And I think that's been a real problem for us so far. And I'm heartened by people talking about continuing in some way this process. And I just want to emphasize that unless it's a conversation and we actually have a dialogue amongst ourselves, that it's just, again, referring to the gentleman before me, it's an exercise in insanity and in standing still, not moving forward. So that's it.
Thank you, Roz. Scott Zintel, your comment?
Hang on, I'm here.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, Michael, how are you? Good to see you again.
Yeah.
So, 31-year resident, raised my kids here. And, you know, I would only say that, well, first I want to echo the thoughts of the others that have gone on before me here. Joan and some people that I don't know. I guess I just want to share with you that, so I started working over at BOCES in the Career Center 15 years ago, and that was really my first interaction with, you know, non-white people. I mean, I have to be honest with you, my whole life has been, you know, basically with white people. So to interact and experience with students, you know, it's just been a wonderful experience, and it taught me a lot. Things that I didn't know about other cultures. So I guess where I'm going with this is when we talked about the implicit bias training, they had a staff training for the faculty over there. They didn't spend very much time on it at all, and a lot of the people were resistant to it. It's an all-white staff there. They just weren't on board with it, and I guess the point is that's something that has to be worked on. It has to be done on a regular basis. We have to keep at it. It's not just a one and done. So if anything, when you do the trainings, put some thought into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Shawnee Moore. Shawnee was one of our panel members.
Is only the first step, I believe. The plan as it stands needs work. I believe it's a good first. I appreciate that the public is taking the time out and making these contributions. And I agree with a lot that has been said this evening, and I will continue to submit my suggestions to Supervisor Sweeten and to regarding reviewing police procedures, which I feel is very important part of this process, and changing language of police procedures as it stands right now. Upon reviewing the collaborative plan, it states that the town board wants to approve the policies and procedures currently on the books by July 1st of this year. And I want everyone to be aware of that this is a continual process, but it does have a deadline, and I hope it could be extended, and I hope that the community will continue to engage in this process of police reform, because the only way that there will be change is if everyone stays involved and remains involved and continues suggestions and continues concrete plans to make change. That's my comment, and thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to make it.
And thanks for your comments and continuing input, Shawnee. Thank you, appreciate it. Sugarloaf Station, I don't know who that is. You want to comment?
No comment at this time.
All right, we're going to go to Susan Miller. Susan, do you have a comment? Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go to Tiffany Howell then. Tiffany, do you have a comment?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to say I'm a Warwick resident for the last 10 years. Couldn't be happier in this town. I wanted to applaud you guys for having this conversation tonight. And I did want to say that as someone who worked in counterterrorism for the city for years, I am begging that you do not take the police out of the schools. It will only take one incident for something really horrible to happen. So I really hope that you guys will not take the police out of the school. My kids have had great experiences with the school cops, and so have their friends. I haven't heard any complaints about them whatsoever. So good job to you guys, and thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany, appreciate it. Valerie, and I always wreck your name, so I'm going to try not to. Luka Kauska? Valerie?
Valerie Luchnikowska.
I'll get it someday.
If you practice a bit, then next time around I'll say something, but right now no comment. But I reserve the right.
Thank you. All right, so let's see then. I have a Veronica with no last name. Veronica?
Hi, thank you for letting me speak tonight. I have a couple of points. Unfortunately, I didn't write them all down, so I'll try to keep it to the point. But really appreciating everyone else's comments. And having read your report, my first comment actually is I went to look for the complaint form on the town website. I can't find it anywhere.
It's on the police, so you go to the police section?
I went to the police form. I can't find it anywhere. So my suggestion is try to make it something a little bit easier. I am pretty, tech savvy.
Okay, fair enough.
So I just think that I should be able to find it pretty quickly. My other concern is you guys started this process a couple of months ago, and saw a picture of who you hired, the 6 out of 8 officers that you hired. I really have some questions about that. I don't understand how, even in the middle of this process, something a little bit more reflective of our community wasn't a part of that lineup.
Again, we tried to explain it. It comes from a civil service list.
I understand about explaining things because I am working on this process with the Chester department as well.
Okay.
And if something isn't working, it needs to change and be fixed. And if you really feel strongly that the process that you're in needs to change, then you need to make that happen. I was also hearing that a person of color ended up not being hired in Warwick and went to Tuxedo. And I'm just really wondering how that happened.
If you could send me that name offline, I can look into that for you.
Okay, I know that there is someone on the, I believe, BIPOC getting the foil on who was being hired and what that process was, so that it is something that is transparent.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I want to talk about is the trainings that you guys have listed. I don't know what 4-hour trainings you're talking about. There are some great mental health trainings that direct support professionals all throughout this county use. I spoke with Tammy at the Department of the Orange County Department of Health. She said those trainings, which are praise and promote, I did include it in the chat, would be something that police officers could use. And of course, the question of a bias training, I've been looking everywhere. They're kind of hard to find. So if you're saying you're going to do a 4-hour training on this or a 4-hour training on that, I think the community really needs to see where that training is coming from, because we have some of them right in the county. They're not 4-hour trainings.
Okay, we listed 4 hours minimum, to show our intent to do
That's
it.
good.
So.
Also, the crisis intervention training, do you have an officer who has the full training for that? The 311 number?
Do we have officers trained in the, with the crisis intervention 311 number?
Why?
That's your question, correct, Veronica?
My question is, do you have an officer who has the full training for the crisis intervention training that Orange County does?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. And then I would expect that the shorter training is available also to all the officers.
Correct.
And they are doing it on a yearly basis?
Yes.
And for how many years have they been doing it?
I don't have that answer for you, but I'll happy to get it for you.
Okay. Those were the three things that right off the bat I felt had to do with your report. The last thing I want to talk about, and you know, if you feel like it's not appropriate, that's fine, but let me know. I'll be happy to come in and talk with you about it. I was at the January 11th incident that happened in front of the Cafe A La Mode.
Yeah, could we keep that separate for?
Yes, we can keep that separate. If anybody else in this group wants to call me on it,
Yeah,
I'd be happy to. And I will say that now that I know there is a complaint that's easy for me to make, I will be making it as soon as I find the form.
Okay, that's great. And I would encourage you, I'm in my office every day. Just, you can call, I can meet you in this big room where there's plenty of distance, and happy to discuss it with you.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. I got a chat that Pat McMillan, I tried to go to you before, you're John Whitaker, I guess. Can you unmute now, Pat?
I'm sorry?
No, I'm trying to get Pat McMillan was interested in speaking. I had her listed as John Whitaker, she told me in the chat. I'm asking her to unmute. All right, well, maybe Pat, you could answer or ask your questions in the chat and I could try to read them for you. I'm sorry that we can't get you unmuted. Another name I have here is William Fanos. William, do you want to unmute? Well, Pat, if you're unmuted and you can't be heard, it's got to be something on your end, because everyone else we've been able to hear unmuted. Try checking your computer, maybe? I don't know what else to tell you. William, do you? Well, Valerie, I'm sorry. I get criticized for not wearing a mask, but now I'll take it off to hopefully help you hear me better. William, do you have a comment? Then no. Then Ed Mullins, I have here, if he would like to unmute. No, then I would ask anyone else that wants to make a comment if they want to raise their hand. There should be a button on the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and I'll try to go back to you. I've hit everybody on the list. So I have a few here now. Let's see. So Ash Stanley, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
All right, so my comment is that I'm concerned with how mental health crises will be approached by the Warwick Police. 1 in 4 fatal encounters with police are involving mentally ill people. There should be a drastically larger amount of time spent on training regarding mental health crises in this town. I would even go as far as requiring specialists for these situations. The next concern I have is the outreach to people of color. It is wonderful that our community is coming together to make comments on reform, but my contention with this reform plan is that it lacks the assurance that people of color deserve when it comes to these changes. It is unclear whether this town's police force can adapt to these changes, continue to stick to this plan, and accept continuous feedback from the community on the efficacy of this plan. Public feedback needs to be prioritized, especially from the people of color in this town. The most important part of this plan is to ensure it is pragmatic in the long term. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Brian Gitt, do you have another comment?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I think this is a great discussion we're having tonight. I want to support, of course, a lot of the people who spoke, Joan, Mary, Roz, of course, Shawnee, and Louisa. And it's a shame that this is maybe perhaps one of the last meetings we'll be having. So one of the recommendations I really want to strongly put forward is that we request an extension of the April 1st deadline so that we can have several more meetings like this. And rather than really have them as a question and discussion, but as a question and answer, so to speak, where people just volunteer information. There could be more of an open discussion, so there could be an interchange. Because part of the process, as was stated by a couple of people, is that these things, in order to remove the polarization that we all have in relation to politics and race and many things, is that when people speak about things and talk about what's important to them, there's an opportunity for people who are not of like mind to understand those points. And then only at that point can really progress be made. So just because there's an arbitrary date set by the state, and I know that there have been several letters sent to the state asking for an extension of the time until the fall, I think if the town is really serious in addressing this question and these questions, that the town should request that take place for some period of time, so that more in-depth discussions, meetings like we're having tonight can take place. And hopefully we can present a more rich and more appropriate 203 plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. All right, Ken Gallagher, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do, Michael. I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to be able to listen in to all of these terrific comments this evening. I agreed with most of them, and I think there's a lot of suggestions that were made that you'll have the opportunity to incorporate in your document that you'll submit to the state, whether that's by April 1st or an extension that I'm sure is warranted considering the scope of the comments that we received here. But originally I was going to comment with regards to the publication notices for this meeting that seemed to be inadequate. It is, and I noticed that the meeting was not listed on your calendar. That was the day before yesterday so that was yesterday that it was put up on. So, I wonder whether that's adequate notice also regarding this extension of time here. I think that's particularly called for, in the light of on what you've done so far to extend and work with many of the folks who, volunteered to participate in proposing right now. So that's all I had to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Let me see. Give her an opportunity here. There she is. Pat, can you unmute yourself now?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Because I worked with them on the Citizens Committee, Joan Terrell, who put everything so elegantly.
Wait, Pat.
Michael, I'm speaking now. Can I speak?
Yeah, but that's not a correct statement.
You then said it again in a conference in this town. Disappointed doesn't begin to describe how the public wasn't involved. Even this meeting, the public wasn't involved. Even this meeting will color of less. As I said, Joan's comments and many of the other comments, and I would hope that has to be done and done in the right way, not this kind of pay.
Ellen Van Dunk, you would like to speak. Could you unmute, please?
Yes, I can. Thank you. What the community needs. The police need to be reformed and restructured. They don't need seminars. They need to have to the structural racism of policing. Increasing police presence.
Let's see, Mary McCoskey, unmuted.
Via email or telephone or whatever, affect what?
Whether there improvements could be made to the plan based on comments.
Okay. I'm hoping that it's not just, sometimes a hearing is, okay, everybody comes in and says something and then.
And tonight. You.
In other words, moving forward from here, will members of the original committee, this is a fluid process, and you are in power to.
Order. The chief and I will continue to weigh those comments. I think I respect certainly give that to them. Now, I've said, term called Equality Communities, that we have those discussions, and that's
Of the EO 203. It's interesting, I didn't interpret, to say that was my interpretation of it. I do wish specific, I feel it would be most important.
Thank you, John.
Comment that based on the comments,
Well,
we have input again,
you've
correct?
you've given input already, right? I mean, I've reviewed.
They will.
Identify yourself, I'll unmute you.
In blue and the Warwick Police Department being shot and killed in our streets. And I respect everyone's opinions on the diversification to say about, you could have done this.
Brian, I don't considering a change of the date. If this is, you got it, Brian. Get the chat, all the chat information.